Now, the landscape of the Indian Ocean that we are going to deal with, one thing to remember about it is that it is a living landscape. It is not a dead landscape. The coastlines are continuously changing due to tectonic as well as rising and shifting shorelines. And this is a very important thing to remember as we go through much of what I will speak about. Now, if you came to this part of the world, the Indian Ocean rim, during the last ice age, which is more than 9,000 years ago when it ended, but really at its peak about 14,000 years ago, the coastline that you would have seen would have been very, very different. Much of the world's water was stuffed in these massive ice sheets that were covering much of the northern hemisphere, but also parts of the southern hemisphere. And the water level was as much as between 100 to 150 meters below where it is now. So as a result, for example, all of the Persian Gulf was actually a flat plain. What you see now as Gujarat was well inside inland, and the coastline kind of was a straight line which kind of went down south. Sri Lanka was a part of the Indian mainland, and all of the islands of Southeast Asia, almost all of them were part of one large land mass which we now call Sundaland. In fact, the ancestors of the Australian Aborigines actually literally walked across all of Southeast Asia and then made a small hop across to Australia. So that was the landscape. Now, starting around 12,000 years ago, these melting glaciers and ice sheets began to fill out these coastlines. And from around 12,000 years ago, you have, for example, the Persian Gulf getting flooded, the Indian coastline getting flooded, ultimately Sri Lanka getting separated from India, and so on. And it is possible that the memory of this event, because it's quite a catastrophic event, is remembered in the flood myths of almost all cultures across the world. So, of course, there is the story of Noah, but also there is the Sumerian story of Gilgamesh. The Australian Aborigines have a flood myth. The Laotians in Southeast Asia have a flood myth. And of course, we also have a flood myth, the story of Manu and Matsya Avatar, the first avatar of Vishnu. So there are all these flood myths, very difficult to tell exact history from it, but it is tempting at least to believe that it may be a memory of these times. But certainly by about 5,000 BC or so, thereabouts, the coastline began to sort of resemble the coastline that we would be familiar with. But it would still be somewhat different